What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the 2 Feet on the Ground Gravity Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Chris. As always, thank you for tuning in today. Hey folks, Jamie and I are exploring this conversation. How do you stay grounded in life? How do we keep from getting carried away with all the noise and chaos in this world? Well, we believe that the way we do that is by establishing our life on a solid foundation. We believe it's the relationships, the experiences, and the values that have allowed us to establish a solid foundation and maintain perspective in life. And today's guest, Colonel Bill Edwards, is going to give you some great stories, some real life experiences that has shaped him in his leadership and in the mindset that he has. He's the author of the book Inside Abu Ghraib, and he co-authored it with General Robert Walters. Folks, the unique thing about this book is, unlike a lot of memoirs that I've read, it doesn't just stop from the soldier or the military member's perspective of being deployed. It goes one step further by including their spouses and their children on what the experience was like for them with their parent being deployed. Colonel Edwards has done a number of things post-military. Currently, he's the president at Caliber Engineering. He is an author for a number of magazines, including Forbes. You're going to want to hear his perspectives, folks. It's going to help you identify your foundations in life. But before we get into that, as always, I'd like to talk about our partner, Service Peace Warriors. Service Peace Warriors is a 501c3 nonprofit that's dedicated to our nation's heroes. That's right. Our service members that are returning with war-related post-traumatic stress injuries and other war-related disabilities, Service Peace Warriors is stepping up and taking care of that. They're doing it by training up service animals and training both the animal and the service member at zero cost to the service member. Yep, that's right. They're out there raising the money, accepting donations. They've even started their own Maddox Dog Training Academy so that they could fund Service Peace Warriors and then also so that they can equip our first responder community with service animals as well. Folks, right now you could partner with them at zero cost to you. I know it sounds like I'm trying to sell you snake oil, but I'm not. Zero cost to you. Google search Amazon Smile and you'll find out how you can link your Amazon account to Service Peace Warriors. And then every time you spend money on Amazon, Amazon's going to kick a few pennies towards Service Peace Warriors. Check them out today, servicepeacewarriors.org. Ladies and gentlemen, with that, let's jump into my conversation with Bill Edwards. Colonel Bill Edwards, thanks for joining me today here on the Gravity Podcast.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for having me. This is awesome. I've been waiting for this for a couple weeks.
Yeah, I've been excited ever since we connected on our phone call, hearing some of your experiences, the fact that you and I actually spent some time in the same place at different times, but same place in Iraq, and then you gifting me with your book. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the perspectives, not just of the different military leaders that you guys pulled into the writing of the book from lots of different perspectives, but the fact that you brought the military family into it as well. Your spouse, Dana, General Walter's spouse, Nancy, your kids. That's what brought so much power to the book, I feel like, is this whole military family perspective of the cost on serving our country, because that's what it is. It really is a cost for the entire family, I think.
Yeah, without a doubt. And frankly, the best reviews of the book are all about the family portions of it. So that makes it even stronger, and super excited to get into more about that.
Yeah. And I'm excited to do that in a second. Now, I have watched about 5 YouTube videos this morning, and I've heard 900 different pronunciations for Abu Ghraib, and I'm probably still pronouncing it wrong. So can you help me out there with the pronunciation?
Yeah, it's we called it Abu Ghraib, but we also called it Abu G. So
you know what? That makes it a whole lot easier.
Abu G is easier, yeah, and a lot of people know it. What's interesting is we're raising the awareness on the history of this whole topic, because what most people saw was simply the bad reporting in the news. They didn't really and we'll get into why we actually ended up there. But I think it's a great topic to talk about from a leadership perspective, but also from a family perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, let's get into that family piece. So you and Dana, what was that story, your guys' story of meeting and then you joining the Army?
Oh yeah. Well, I was playing college football actually, and figured out that I wasn't going to go to the NFL. So I had to do a course correction pretty quick on like what I was going to do in life. So I was at San Diego State University, and I was walking to class one day, and there was these temporary white trailers that everyone's used to seeing. They used to hold classes in them, but they were also office spaces, things like that. And it said Army ROTC on the side of the building. So I said, well, I'll go in here and check it out, see what they're offering. And I was, had a backpack on, flip-flops, shorts, San Diego. And I walked in and I met this guy, Captain Pete Ash. He was an instructor there. He was an 03, an Army captain. And I said, hey, what's the Army about? What's this whole thing? And he handed me this little Ranger handbook, which you end up using, so much of it later on as you're training and all the principles that are involved in it. And that's a shout out to the Ranger community. Great job for putting that together. But that's how you train. Cadets were trained in those days. And he said, take this home and read it. And if you think it's interesting, then come back and see me. So I looked it over, and they were talking about parachuting and bridges with ropes and all kinds of stuff I thought was kind of fun and exciting. So that's how I joined the Army. I went back, and next thing I know, I'm in class. I'm in the ROTC class. The next thing I know, I'm in training. In fact, what was really interesting is they sent me to airborne school, which is the parachute training, literally like 4 months after I joined the program. So I was at airborne school, and I didn't even know how to stand in formation. So I had a really great master sergeant in my squad at Fort Benning, who just put me under his wings and said, okay, you're just going to follow me around, cadet, and just do what I do. And that's how I survived the school and made it through. Fast forward, I went into the Army. I was commissioned as a armor officer, basically a tank commander at the time. And I went to Berlin, Germany, and it was the island in Germany, surrounded by the Soviets at the time. And then we had the city divided into different sectors, which was the US sector, British and French. And it was great. It was, it was such a fun time because we were literally living in this gorgeous city and, running our Army organizations. And I was in the tank platoon there in Berlin. And we were we called it going to the West at the time, where you would go into West Germany, and we would rail our tanks into the West and train it at Hohenfels and Grafenwehr, some of the places people are aware of and know. But in the city is where I met Dana. She was a foreign exchange student going to the University in Berlin. And she was working at the tennis club. And I was going over at lunch sometimes, and I was renting the ball machine and playing tennis by myself, and trying to get better, I guess. And that's where I met her. So, and then the story goes, we went out a couple times, we got married. Our oldest daughter was born in Germany during that tour. And it's been a great marriage. We've been together 30 years. So.
Wow, that's a remarkable story, especially for the military members, because of the strain that the military life puts on the family. I've seen in my military experience, just a lot of my friends really struggle there. Some of them have persevered and been able to stay strong, and others, it's just been too much of a strain. So I wouldn't mind getting into that because of the Marriage Monday focus that my wife and I sometimes do at the podcast. And I think we're going to do that here in just a little bit. So you were stationed all over the world. I mean, literally, correct?
Yeah. We ended up, I think when we count, Dana and I count sometimes our moves, I think we had 17 or 18 moves in my career. We lived in Germany twice. I spent, more than 3 years in the Middle East. And then of course, all over the United States. So what was, going back to the strength of my wife and my daughters and the family, you can't really have that kind of career without that support structure. Me as the soldier, I needed that support structure, and it's so powerful when it works well. What I always remember about my wife is she, no matter where we were moving, she would always say, well, we never go anywhere that we don't like. And so I'm like, well, that's great, because there are places that we've gone that I didn't like, and you guys really fit in great, and enjoyed it. So that always made the transition easy. The other thing I'll say about her is we got to the point where she could pack our house out and pack it and then get the house set up on the other end in 3 days, with pictures hung, with everything done. So, and she always worked extra hard to do that, because she wanted our daughters to feel normal, to feel like they were at home, even though they were in a different city or a different country. But yeah, I always give her credit for that, because she could because when you're a soldier, you're off to work. I mean, you're at work, you're at your unit. All of that burden falls on your wife and your kids to get the house set up. And there were times that I went to places we lived where I had been deployed for a year, and I come back and I didn't even know, like what it looked like, or where the silverware was, things like that.
Yeah, and that's what happened here, right? Before, in your preparation, or just before you deployed to Abu Ghraib, you weren't going there. You were going to Germany. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. So we were at Fort Leavenworth. We were at the school called the Command and General Staff College, which is where majors go for additional training and leadership, and before they go to their next operational assignment. And then we were told while we were at school that we were going to probably get pulled out of class early, or out of training early, because this Operation Iraqi Freedom was kicking off. And so we were all sort of scrambling around looking for what units we were going to go to, talking to our personnel manager. And I was assigned to a brigade, and that brigade was in Germany, but it was deployed, right? It was deploying. So regardless, I would have ended up in Iraq in some form or fashion. But as luck has it, I was picked up by Bob Walters, who I wrote the book with, as to be his executive officer, which was one of the greatest professional development opportunities for me, because I went right into a really, really good unit as the XO, the number 2, and ended up in Germany still. But within 4 or 5 days after we got to Germany, I was on a plane out of Rhine-Main into Iraq, and Dana was left holding the bag on an empty apartment, no furniture, and 2 girls to take care of. So, and she did it, in a fantastic manner. So.
One thing I love this part of the book, and I love her mindset. I don't know your wife, but hearing you talk about her and reading the book, I feel like I know her a little bit. She has a positive mindset. She talks about in the book that her and your 2 daughters were literally camping out in this empty apartment. And her takeaway from it was adventurous. And then she was like, you know what? We really don't need a whole lot anyway. We don't need a whole lot to be happy. And if you have that mindset in life, it doesn't matter what circumstances you're in, you're going to find happiness. Much like you said, your wife said that there wasn't a deployment or an assignment, that you guys were at that you guys didn't enjoy.
Yeah. That's I think it's why it's so important to highlight, and a lot of this gets lost. And I think when we wrote the book, and it was really Bob's idea to say, hey, let's bring the families into this story. And I was like, yeah, that's fantastic. That's a great idea. So I can't take credit for that. I have to give it to Bob for actually bringing it forward. But once we got it moving, and we were working with Paul Zanin, who is just a fantastic author. He's a British author, well known for boxing books. And he just helped us with every step of the way to get this thing going. And it took us almost 11 months, twice a week, to get this thing put together. And so it was an adventure. But then we rolled in our wives and daughters, and it was coordinating across the country and getting our daughters and wives on interviews with Paul and us, and all these different coordination aspects were really super fun and exciting. And the stories we were hearing from our spouses and children were the first times we were hearing it. So we were in shock. I was in shock. I won't speak for Bob, but I was in shock at some of the things I learned from my family.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you guys deployed to Iraq just a few days after arriving in Germany, you didn't initially go to Abu Ghraib. Where did you first go, and then get forward deployed from there?
Yeah, the unit was in theater already. They were in Balad. They were at the airfield in Balad, which is north of Baghdad, off of MSR Tampa. Most people are familiar with that, that would listen to the podcast, I think. I got there and landed in Bayat, the Baghdad International Airport on the military side. The civilian side wasn't functioning at this time. It was destroyed. It was 2003. Got to Bayat and found a tactical field phone in a tent and asked some soldier that was walking through, have you heard of this unit, the 165th Military Intelligence Battalion? He's like, yeah, I have. They're up in Balad. And I said, okay. So I was able to figure out how to call the Tactical Operations Center, tell them that I was there. And when I did, they sent alerts team down, which is a long-range surveillance infantry unit that was part of our organization. They sent alerts team down to pick me up. And that was fun and exciting because the alerts company in our battalion was just a fantastic company of just warriors. I mean, just great people doing their jobs. And they came down to get me. And I tell a story in the book about, because I didn't travel to Iraq with a weapon. And the sergeant that picked me up, he just couldn't believe I didn't have a weapon on me. And he handed me his 9mm, asked me if I knew how to use it, and then hopped up on the 50 cal on the Humvee and told me, hey, you'll ride in this truck. And off we went. And as soon as we got onto MSR Tampa, which is a highway, so it's really Baghdad's Highway 1 is what it is, the Iraqi Highway 1. And as soon as we got on the Iraqi highway, we were in a firefight. There was someone shooting at us as we were rolling up the road. And we had picked up another friend of mine, Mickey Williams in Baghdad. It was taking him back to Balad. And we're all literally standing there in the middle of the highway, I don't know, hours after getting there, and all this stuff was happening already. So, yeah. It was well, the end of that story was we made it safely to Balad because we had great sergeants in that organization that picked me up, that small squad that picked me up. They fought it off, and then we kept moving to Balad. And when I got there, Bob greeted me and he said, "Hey, I heard you were in a little bit of a firefight coming up. Welcome to Iraq." And then that's how we met. So,
wow. And then what led up to? How long were you there at Balad, and what led up to you guys forward deploying from there to Abu Ghraib?
Well, we were sitting really pretty good in Balad. I mean, at that point, we thought the whole thing was over. We thought the conflict was over. We were doing normal patrolling, keeping security around our fob, working with the units there, just doing the normal stuff to stay active. But we were ready to go home. I mean, after about this, and I'm talking probably about 90 days after I'd been there, and then all of a sudden, we were unfortunately, our brigade had one of the first IED casualties that actually happened in the war. I mean, it was, I think, in August or early September of 2003, and the IED then became a thing, right? And so Bob actually left the FOB that day to go down to the IED site, and came back and told us he couldn't believe the devastation these things were doing. And this was one of the very first ones. So we were in shock. He brought back a piece of the it was probably an artillery shell, but he brought it back that was used as an IED, and the size of the metal and the heaviness of it, just we couldn't believe that's the type of stuff that was going through the air. And unfortunately, a soldier was killed on that convoy. But so again, we were sitting there and we're waiting in Balad, and then we got new orders that we were going to stay for a year. So then we just went into really Army mode and started picking up the pace on what we were doing. In about late October of 2003, I was in the Tactical Operations Center of the headquarters, and the phone on the desk, the field phone, rang, and I picked it up, and it was Mickey Williams, the guy who I had met earlier in the deployment. And he said to me, he said, "Hey, Bill, have you heard of Abu Ghraib?" And I said, "Nope, haven't heard of it." And he said, "Do you know where it is?" I said, "No, I have no idea where it's at. Let me look." And so I went to a map and tried to figure out, I'm like, "Oh yeah, this is out near Fallujah and Ramadi." He said, "Yeah, are you paying attention to what's happening?" And I go, "No, we didn't have really any news or anything where we're at." And he said, "Move the battalion to Abu Ghraib and fix it." And I was like, "Okay, Mickey, that's not a military mission. Normally it's task and purpose. Tell me what our task is. Tell me what the purpose is, and we'll make it happen." He's like, "Bill, you just have to go fix it." And so hung up the phone. This was we call that Black Wednesday. To this day, we still call it Black Wednesday. I grabbed Bob and I said, "I just got orders to move the battalion to," and he was a battalion commander. I said, "I just got orders to move the battalion to Abu Ghraib." And he's like, "Really? All right, well, let's figure out what we have to do." So that night we went into a planning session and we got some key people together. And the next morning we went to Abu Ghraib with a team of leaders from the battalion to see what we were walking into. And then that's a whole nother story.
Well, I think that's the time to get into it. I have a ton of notes from that where I'm sitting there thinking, are you kidding me? I mean, we have Claymore mines that says this in towards enemy, and it's pointing at the good guys. So just paint that picture for the listeners. What did you guys walk into when you got down there for this assessment?
Yeah, so I mean, if you just think quickly, so we had the call the night before, so roughly, I don't know, maybe 7 hours later, after some sleep and then getting things together, we were rolling, and that was the professionalism of the organization that could do that. And we really leveraged our LURS company because they were infantry, they were ranger, they were very skilled operators. So they really took us around the battlefield during that tour. I always felt really safe with them because I knew they were just super good at what they did, their trade craft. But we got on the road and we went down to Abu Ghraib, which is not an easy drive. I mean, you gotta leave Balad and then you got to get on MSR Tampa and go south, and then you got to do the dogleg right into Anbar province, which was super hot at the time. It was exploding with insurgent activity. We called it the Wild West. It was really the Wild West out there. You never knew what was going to happen at any moment. But we got down to Abu Ghraib, and the first thing we noticed as we're rolling into what we would consider the fob, there was no entry control point. So there was like a free flow of who went and came out of this prison area. And I should step back a little bit. This prison was built by the Iraqis in the 50s, 1950s. So it was an established prison, but it was used by Saddam Hussein to imprison his political competitors or people that disagreed with him. So it was a really prominent prison in that area of Iraq. And it's where the gallows were. It's where all the really horrible things were. It was a horrific place. So our first impression I just want to get the stage there, but as we're rolling in, there's no standards, there's no discipline, there's no accountability on this fob. We know right away because we're an organization that is based on that. And so the sergeants, the NCOs that are with me, and I'm riding with the sergeant major of the battalion, they just go into sergeant mode, is what I would call it, NCO mode. And then Bob and I and the ops officer and some of the other company commanders that were there, we went into the fob and started devising our plan on how we were going to assess it, because we broke the fob up into different pieces and we all different ways to look at it. And really what we found was just one problem after another. It was a mess. The security was horrible. And not to mention, at the time, there was probably 4,000 detainees on that fob in a space of 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. So it's a really small space, and you have 4,000 detainees in the middle of it. We got together at in the middle of the day after we had gone around and done our assessments, and we just looked at each other and said, okay, we've got to figure this out, and we've got to lead our way through this. And Bob did a great job. He was our commander, and he did a great job of setting those conditions. What I did, and I talk about this guy in the book a lot, his name's Romeo Qureshi, but that guy was awesome. And he was the battalion logistics officer, and he had only been in theater about a month. He had just gotten into Iraq. And I looked at him and I said, hey, Romeo, you're going to stay here and get everything set up. We're going to go back and get the unit. So I left him at Abu Ghraib, and then he had to start building the infrastructure. And when we got down there, he had everything ready to go. He was fantastic. So super guy. I still keep in touch with him to this day.
So your guys' responsibility was the entire FOB. And if I remember correctly, a different unit was actually responsible for the prison itself. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we were sent there to establish discipline standards, accountability, basically get it back into what we would consider a normal operating environment. We focused everything on security of the FOB, security of the perimeter, and then the external patrolling of that area as well to keep us safe. Really what you do with patrolling is you just extend your perimeter out, right? So that it gives you more time and space. And so we focused on that. We had nothing to do with detainee operations. And that was something the Army was figuring out. They had to bring in a different organization to take over that responsibility, not to mention sending us there to take on the external responsibility. So that's what we did. And we focused on that. And, it was a harrowing, 6 months. It was a really harrowing 6-month ride because we ended up leaving, I think in April of 2004 when we were replaced eventually. But yeah, I mean, and there was so much work to do. There was not a day that we were not busy just improving security, setting conditions for normal to live in some place and have a normal place to live. When we got there was no dining facility. There were no showers. There was no latrines. There was nothing there. And so we had to start from ground zero. And that's what Romeo did that week before. And we had some Iraqi contractors that worked with us, and they helped us get that together. And that's a point I'd like to make too, is that there was a great connection with the Iraqi people in some places. And we had really fabulous people that we worked with that were just trying to survive the war, protect their families, make some money, do the things that just normal people do. So, and I talk about him a little bit in the book, I believe, especially Ammar. Ammar was great. I tell a story about him later. Yeah.
Yeah, Ammar and Muhammad, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Yeah, and Muhammad was killed actually after we left. So,
I saw the exact same experience, and certainly my view was a lot smaller, just being a lower ranking NCO. But when I served at Talil Air Base in southern Iraq, the relationships that we had with the Bedouin people outside of the FOB was remarkable. And they, like the picture you just painted, they were families that this was their way of life, and they were literally trying to survive an absolutely, they had been surviving an absolutely horrible situation, because in southern Iraq, they were not Saddam Hussein's friend.
No, that's right. And in fact, what's funny is, in 2010, I commanded Talil Air Base as a colonel, as a lieutenant colonel. I was the FOB commander and working for 1st Infantry Division at the time. But I met with those same tribes you probably met with, 7 years earlier, and went out and did the same thing, tried to create an environment where, and at this point I was pretty savvy on working in that environment and understanding how to navigate it. So it was a great, and there were some great historic landmarks around Talil too, like the ziggurat, so.
Yeah, the birthplace of Abraham.
Right.
Absolutely remarkable history to be there and see. And hey, you talk about in the book the importance of routines. When you guys get to Abu Ghraib and you guys start improving physical security and health and morale, you talked about the importance of routines. And I think this can really resonate with everyone, even outside the military community. The last couple of years has totally destroyed people's routines. And I think we've started to get back into some new routines. What was that like? And what were those routines that you and the NCOs put in place?
Yeah, it's a great point to focus on, and not only that, but our families had to have the same routines on the home front. So they were, and I'll tell a quick story of what Dana was doing as well. But what we were doing in Balad is we were in a routine. We were patrolling on a regular basis. We were doing all the admin and logistics things we needed to do. We were doing the operational things. So we were in a routine. When we got moved to Abu Ghraib, that routine was shook up, and we had to reestablish routine. And as a leader, it's super important to get everyone, one, first to understand what we're doing and to articulate that well. We call that clear guidance, right? You give people clear guidance. And a lot of times I would give guidance and then ask if they understood what I was talking about, just to make sure. And a lot of times I would get blank stares. So that means that my guidance wasn't clear. So we did that. We established routines. One of the things we were doing, which is simple and it may sound funny, but we would get box sets of DVDs from the States. And one of them was The Sopranos. And we would give we would give that disc, or we would share it around with everyone, but we would tell people you could only watch one episode at a time. And so what you were doing was you were getting into a routine of once a week, I'm going to get my Sopranos episode. And really it helps, mentally, it helps you, relax and focus. And, we were using little techniques like that. But also, we also told our team to continue to exercise. If we had hard buildings, hard structures on Abu Ghraib, you really couldn't do physical training outside there because it was too dangerous. But we brought some treadmills into some of the interior buildings, and we were telling people focus on doing those things like physical training. The other was make sure you're having meals with your friends, make sure you're having meals with someone. And so, we ended up building a dining facility there that turned out to be a really great dining facility. We, in the beginning, we were eating, out of a containerized kitchen, the field type of eating environment. But once we built the dining facility and we got it set up and we had, regular meals planned, then people could go and take those type of breaks as well and sit with their friends and have that routine. So, and then at the very end, we didn't really get to take too much advantage of it, but we built a internet cafe too. So if we were to stay there another 6 or 7 months, we would have had that place completely, at a standard that everyone could live on. But.
Yeah. Hey, you mentioned the routines that the families got on. Can you unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah. So, Dana would tell me that where our headquarters was in Germany was quite a drive for her. She was living remotely, really near Rhein-Main Air Base, which is an air base. She was in a town called Langen. Langen was the town she lived in. And it was housing. And I literally only saw that apartment one time. And then when I came back, she had it set up as our home. But her routine was she would get the girl, Madeline, my oldest daughter, get her to school at Rhein-Main. She would get her on a bus, and she was in 4th grade, I think. And she would go to Rhein-Main and then she would on the bus, and then she would put Elise in our car, my youngest daughter, and they would drive to Darmstadt, which was about an hour drive, I think, from where we lived, to get the mail, because our mail was delivered in Darmstadt. So she had to make the drive to Darmstadt, which became a routine for her. And then her and Elise got into that routine, and then they could run errands if they needed to or whatever. But it also kept her busy and kept her mind off of the deployment. So, one of the things I talk about is her routine of getting the mail. And, it may seem, for people listening to the podcast, they're like, yeah, I just go outside my house, or I have a mailbox on my house, or I go down the street and I pick it up at the common box. But in in Germany, she had to drive an hour to go get it. So.
Yeah. Hey, I loved the reflections of both of your daughters, and I'm going to look to the book here for just a second, because both Madeline and Elise talk about this in the portions that they contributed to. Madeline points out that when she was younger, it was more of an abstract awareness that dad's kind of in danger. But as she got older, that she just shut out the media. She wouldn't watch the news because it was full of negativity and it could create anxiety and stress. And she really wrapped herself in this bubble and just focused on the work of being happy and fulfilled. And I'm just sitting there going, good work, Dad and Mom. I mean, just the fact that your kids really became, military kids. Sometimes people call them military brats. Is what I saw from military kids, at least the ones that I was surrounded with, they were remarkable human beings that were maturing much beyond their years because of they were being exposed to real life. And then Elise says a very similar thing later in the book. And she just talks about how your first deployment, she really didn't realize what it was like, but on your second, that's when she realized that every time she said goodbye to you, it might be the last time that she saw you. And just hearing from your kids as well, that they were also flipping a switch. They were also getting into this mindset routine of, I have a job to do. I'm going to stay focused on what's right in front of me right now. And I'm going to get through this until dad gets back. Just remarkable story.
Yeah, they were wonderful with everything that they did. And, you know, we were always a transient family. We were moving all the time. We were establishing new homes. But on the deployments, you know, it was extra hard because you're moving to a new place. And then I was deploying. And then, of course, Dana had everything on her shoulders. But, you know, Madeline and Elise were both, they assimilated quickly. You know, they made friends, you know, quickly. And that's the other thing about them, you know, I think a military child understands is really how to get in and find that, you know, just find friends and start doing things. Madeline was super academic. Elise was little during this time of 0304. She was 3. And Madeline was really academic. And she's an immunologist now. She's at Columbia University finishing her PhD, doing medical research, which doesn't surprise any of us here, but, you know, she processed things differently in the way she thought. And by the way, that has to come from Dana's side of the family, because I definitely didn't have that type of skill from an educational perspective. But yeah, the girls were great. It was for me the first time I heard them talk about it when we wrote the book and we put the book together. I also thought it was interesting, you know, how they thought about like the combat action badge, and, you know, when they read the certificate on why you're getting something, that, you know, that was touching to them as well, because they didn't really know. They would just go to the ceremonies and they would hear someone read a certificate of, you know, why you were getting an award, but they didn't really know why that was happening until they heard it. And I think Madeline has a portion of the book where she talks about that as well. But yeah, just we were blessed, and still blessed to this day. So
yeah. Hey, I want to paint that picture, and then I want to get to a question a little bit more of Abu Ghraib, in that, I mean, you guys didn't have latrines, so you're having to do these burnouts where you're catching your feces on fire. You have initially no discipline, no entry control point. You have claymore mines facing the wrong way. Huge problem. You can't run outside. I mean, when I was in southern Iraq, we got attacked, but we could still run outside most of the time, right? I mean, there wasn't this concern of every single day we were going to get mortared. And that was a reality for you folks here. And on top of all of that, you had to sit there and fight the wildlife. You had these enormous camel spiders, and you had mice problems, to the point that when you flipped out the lights, the mouse traps that you set in your room would be going off every couple minutes. How did you guys combat that? Because I mean, that could really take a toll on the overall morale when there's just one more kick in the teeth, one more thing that is making this an extremely hard deployment.
Yeah, so the environment in Iraq is harsh. I mean, outside of cities and where we were at. But you know what we did. I'll just talk about like the mouse issue or the mice issue. I had written a letter, and mail, by the way, was on a lag of at this time about 9 weeks. So you would send a letter and then you would get something back about 9 weeks later. So I had sent my dad a letter and said, hey, can you send us some mouse traps? And because when I asked Amar, who was one of our Iraqi contractors, to go to Baghdad or someplace and get mouse traps, he brought back a rat trap, because they were used to catching rats out of the Euphrates or the Tigris rivers, you know, big rodents. I said, no, we need the small ones, you know, and he didn't know where to find those. So my dad ended up sending us about 100 or 150, and I just gave them out to everyone. And so to get to your point, how did we combat that? Well, I made it fun, right? I said, hey, look, let's count who can get the most rats or mice at night with their traps. And in some mornings I would come in with, 2 or 3 traps, and I'd have the mouse, and I'd say, well, I got 3, and then they'd tag, okay, the XO got 3 last night, or whatever. And we were, you have to, because the environment is it's just filthy, it's dirty, it's, there's so many ways to get sick, and you're just doing the things to make it fun, I guess. Again, getting into more of a routine in that instance. The other thing about the camel spiders, there's really not much you can do. They sort of gravitate toward any type of water. So, when we went to Abu Ghraib, we didn't have a shower. We were using burnouts. That got better later on. But I asked Mohammed, I said, can you build us a shower? And he built a plywood shower for us. And we connected a little pump to the water buffalo, which is a water storage trailer. And we were pumping the water into this little makeshift shower. And it was the only shower we had in Abu Ghraib. And so we were all using it. And the unit, was large. It was 300 or 400 people. And you would have to just figure out a time when you could get over there. In fact, it was so muddy and bad. You had to wear your tennis shoes in the shower, while you were in there. But the camel spiders would go in there, and you'd have to beat them out, and a lot of people say that they attack you, but really what they do is they're sort of light sensitive. So they go towards shadows and lights. And so you might be like moving away from them, and they're trying to stay in your shadow, and you think they're chasing you, but they're really not. But yeah, they're really interesting creatures that you don't ever see in the US, at least where I live in Colorado.
Yeah. Hey, throughout both in the book and then through this conversation today, I really hear you talking about something I saw you post in Forbes magazine, talking about reputation. You've talked a number of times about the professionalism of the officers and the NCOs in your unit that allowed you to be so fluid and flexible, that allowed you to make Abu Ghraib livable. I mean, that's really what you all did. You transformed it into a place still miserable, but allowed your soldiers to flip the switch and make the best of it that they could. Can you unpack that a little bit from your article that you just posted today in Forbes? Yeah,
so I've been in private sector now almost over 5 years, and what I've learned or what I've tried to articulate with the private sector teams I work with are, reputation is really important. So I put this article together. It came out in Forbes today. But our organization in Iraq, the 165th, we had a reputation that was built over time of a unit that had standards, a unit that was disciplined, a unit that was accountable for what we did. Those are the foundations of any unit, any good unit. But truly the only way that a unit functions in that manner is because of the non-commissioned officers, the sergeants of the unit. I used to say, well, at least later when I was in command of a battalion later, I asked the sergeant major that worked for me to run the unit, and I would command it. And so that's what the NCOs do. And we could not have been successful at Abu Ghraib without our NCOs. And our sergeant major was fantastic. He was a great human being, and he did his job well. But without that structure, that's how units break down. And that's what happened at Abu Ghraib. That structure broke down, and then bad things start to happen, right? And so I don't think it's any different than society, is the way, society works when structures break down and we start to see, bad things happen, at least in that manner. But reputation is so important, but reputation is earned. And leaders need to teach their teams the importance of reputation, because you can work for a year to gain a great reputation, and you can ruin it in 2 minutes. And so you got to think in those terms. And it doesn't mean that, and I say in the article too, it doesn't mean that you're not going to make mistakes. I lived through the zero defect army in the 90s, where, mistakes were, You couldn't make mistakes. It was not palatable. You can't live and work in an environment like that. People are going to make mistakes. Leaders need to underwrite those mistakes and then use those as teaching events so that you can be a better organization later, right? And the next thing you do. And we didn't do, we weren't a perfect unit. We weren't, no one's saying that. I'm never saying we're perfect, but we learned quickly from our mistakes and we corrected them. And that's what makes a good org. And you can apply that to families, life, private sector work. It doesn't matter. It's all the basic principles are the same.
Now, what's the problem when we have that zero defect culture? What issues does that bring up?
Well, I mean, people are afraid to make mistakes. That's the first thing. And they're going to be completely risk averse. And in my opinion, you have to assume some risk when you're doing things. And it doesn't, in a learning environment, you want to be a little risky so that you can test your abilities. And so that it's always about testing the limits, right? And when you get into an environment where you can't make a mistake, your unit or your organization is not going to be creative, and your unit or organization is not going to be innovative. And so right there, you're losing all the brain power of the people around you. And to me, that's just a waste of time,
Yeah.
And I think the Army did a great job of course correcting later, because when we went into Iraq in 2003, we were well oiled. I mean, we were trained. I'm talking about, at least my opinion of the Army itself. And I saw one of my bosses had an OER, and his OER, his officer evaluation report, said that he contributed to destroying the Iraqi Army in 17 days. So that's what it took. The initial push in OIF was, but when we got into that state where we lost the bubble was that time period between the end of hostilities and that first IED in the end of August. And that's, in my opinion, when the enemy we were going to face for the next 10 years or more reorganized.
Yeah. Now I see that play out in civilian law enforcement as well. If we don't create cultures where people can fail and learn from those failures, then people are going to hide. People might lie depending on their character. Or like, I liked that extra piece you just said, they're not going to try to innovate. They're going to stay safe. This is what's safe, not going to get in trouble for doing the safe thing. When in reality, we need to be thinking of creative solutions, because the world is ever changing. You wrote a different article in, I think, Safety Magazine, and you were talking about the need for innovation, the need for forward thinking. I think it was mainly in the security realm.
Yeah. Well, I tell people this, and as a leader, and you're a leader, and any leader in any organization, if you're solving all the problems and you're making all the decisions, your organization's going to fail. And so I tell people all the time, I like to hear what you have to say. I want to know if you have the idea. And I always led my organizations that way. I believe in collaboration. And if you try to lead solely as by yourself, I think that it's a path for failure.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking from 35 years of doing this. So
when I started to step into a leadership role, one of my mentors told me, "Hey, Chris, when you wake me up at 3 a.m. with a police emergency, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. So you need to be ready to answer these questions. What's going on? What's your plan? And what do you need from me?" He goes, "I'm not going to say anything else. I'm going to ask 3 questions. And if at the end of that, if your answer is, I don't need anything from you, and you've created a lawful, ethical plan that's not compromising officer safety, I'm going to say, awesome, shoot me an email when you're done." And we're done. And what I found was, one, it forced me to actually think through the problems before I called the bosses. And then 2, I did this with brand new folks. When I started as a sergeant, I think it was 7 brand new employees and 3 senior folks. And so I told them, I gave them the 3 questions, and it forced young, inexperienced folks to be decision makers. And here's the thing, a lot of times they had really good ideas.
Right.
And sometimes they were much better than mine would have been. And
Right.
so now we're having, and so it's creating decision makers, empowering them to move forward and make decisions.
Well, and our families, transitioning back to that topic, but our wives were doing exactly that. They were having all of the burden of decisions on them, but they were probably, at least when I talked to Dana about it, they were leveraging, what the girls were seeing and what the girls were dealing with. And of course, the other spouses that were back in Germany at the time. Remember too, our families were not even living in the United States. They were living in Germany. So they were living in a foreign country and navigating all of the nuances of living in a different place. So again, I mean, I can't even say enough for, how much they were actually doing. And, my wife, I commanded twice in my career as a company commander and a battalion commander. And so she had to fill that role. And in this case in Abu Ghraib, Nancy was Bob's wife, and she was filling the role of the senior spouse for our organization. And all of that comes for her to organize as well is incredible, right?
Yeah. No, that was an extra piece, and I'm not gonna unpack that one, folks. You got to get the book, because there were some things that the families endured while their soldiers were deployed that are going to make you shake your heads, make you a little bit angry, but I think also just give you pride as Americans. The fact that, once again, the military family does remarkable work as they support their deployed soldiers, Marines, airmen, and sailors. So, hey, Bill, how can people follow you? How can people watch the work that you're producing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty active, actually. I never had social media until after I left the military. So I'm experimenting in LinkedIn. I have an account. I keep the profile updated. I do quite a bit of writing for Forbes and other magazines, specifically on leadership topics and then security and safety topics. But and recently I wrote, and I wanted to touch on this with you real quick before we end, but there's a difference. I wrote an article about the difference between morale and esprit de corps. And I think this applies not only to private sector, but families, in general life. Morale is individual, and it's individually focused. And morale is one of those things that can change in a few minutes, because you could trip and your morale would change because you just, scraped your knee. What's really important from a leadership perspective is to build esprit de corps, right? Esprit de corps is about the team. Esprit de corps will create an elevation in morale. So it works that way. A lot of people like to focus on the idea of morale. My morale is high. My morale is not high. That's important individually, but as a leader, what's important is the esprit de corps of the organization. The 165th in Abu Ghraib had extremely high esprit de corps. That's how we were able to function. And it was inculcated by the leaders, the NCOs, the non-commissioned officers, the officers, into the ranks of the junior soldiers. So that is one thing that I really like to emphasize is, if you're a leader, focus on esprit de corps of your organization, whatever it could be. If it's a business, a private business, or even in your family, what's the esprit de corps in your family? Because we all have up and down days. That's normal human stuff. And we just need to, look at it that way. It's my advice on that.
Hey, are there maybe just a couple, 2 or 3 general things that are going to just be applicable to all folks in that regard? How can we as leaders positively impact esprit de corps?
Well, so the first thing is attitude. Energy is the second thing, and underwriting mistakes. If you are a leader and you go, I mean, attitude's 100% of every day. It does. If your attitude is bad in the morning, you're probably going to have a bad day. You've got to shift. So attitude, energy, leadership requires energy, no matter what anyone says. If you ask Bob, my partner in the book, or anyone, he was tired every day, because just like we were, because we had to have energy. You got to keep people moving. And then, of course, being positive and underwriting mistakes. Because what people, even me as a person, if I make a mistake, I want someone to say, hey, Bill, it's okay. You made them. It's good. We're going to fix it in this manner. Or I'm going to teach you how to do something different so you're better at it. I classify it this way real quick. There's two ways to bin a problem. So put it into a bin. A problem is either a challenge or a crisis. Okay. That's the way I look at life. It's either a challenge or a crisis. The only thing that goes in the crisis bin is life, limb, or eyesight. So that tells you right there, 99% of your problems in a day or things you're encountering are challenges. So if you can look at the world that way, and I talk about this all the time, people would come to me when I was in 06, a colonel, panicking because they had this problem. And I would say, I think I can fix your problem with a phone call. So don't worry about it. It's a challenge. It's not a crisis. What you're doing in that respect, as well as a leader, is you're lowering the stress levels of your organization. And think about that. I mean, if you can even just take an ounce of stress off someone's day or life, you're doing them a huge service. So.
I like it. I think that totally is applicable to our marriages, our family life, for-profit, government, nonprofit, regardless of the sector you're in.
Yeah,
that is absolutely something we can apply.
It's everywhere.
Well, for the listeners, look down in the comment section. There's going to be a link down there for the book Inside Abu Ghraib on Amazon, available for sale now, as well as Bill's LinkedIn profile. Bill, time is my most valuable commodity. I can't create more of it. Impossible. And you have given me an awful lot of yours. I really appreciate you, brother. Thank you for just the insights in leadership and the vulnerability in this book in sharing your opening up to the family experience as well.
Thanks a lot, Chris. I'm actually grateful to you for actually spending some time with me and letting me tell the story. So thank you very much.
Yep. Have a great day.
See ya.
Wow, ladies and gentlemen, I loved the way Bill ended this interview talking about the difference between morale and esprit de corps. Folks, that's something we can implement in our families today. That's something we can implement in any of your workplaces, in your neighborhoods. Chew on that for a little bit and see how right now you can implement those principles that Bill talked about. Folks, Jamie and I want to hear from you. How are we doing? There's a few different ways you can communicate back with us. First and foremost, I hope you choose to follow us on whatever social media platform, whatever podcast platform you're consuming this on, or on YouTube. Also, you can rate and review us on Apple, on Spotify. Go down to the bottom of our main page. There's 5 stars waiting down there. We would really appreciate a 5-star rating if we've earned it from you. If we haven't earned it from you, folks, keep your stars. Shoot me an email at chris@gravityct.com. Let me know how we can make this better. You could let us know of future Marriage Monday topics or guests for me to interview. Folks, we only get to live this life once. Let's go out and take care of the people around us, the people in our tribe. Love each other well. Take care. God bless.